version in one of the FAQs. Not entirely different, but just slightly different. So we wanted to combine those, make one definition of HCP, and put it in the glossary so that we're all speaking from the same script, so to speak. So I just wanted to call out that definition in the slide here. I also, as I already mentioned, wanted to call out the geographic reach, just to make it clear that the code is intended to apply to U.S. HCPs, whether they're in the U.S. or outside the U.S. It's not intended to address a company's interactions with, for example, Australian HCPs or Japanese HCPs. There are different laws and industry standards that apply there. On that note, I will say one of the goals that AdvaMed has in front of it and is currently working on is trying to harmonize those requirements around the world, so that ultimately, as we move down the road here, if there are distinctions between, say, the APAC Med Code or the MedTech Europe Code or the MTANS Code in Australia and New Zealand, that those differences are slight and really exclusively based on market distinctions. So we are certainly moving in that direction, and there's harmonization efforts underway, but I did want to clarify that as far as the geographic reach goes. Throughout this slide deck, and you'll have a copy of this, but throughout this slide deck, I've included some areas where there's a transparency impact. So just to be aware of the fact that some of the sunshine changes might be impacted by some of the code changes and vice versa. And here I would just say, just remember that the code restrictions apply to U.S. HCPs, and the broad definition of HCP really includes that expanded set of HCPs under the revised Sunshine Act. Next slide. Slide 9, we've got our first poll questions, and we have two here. The first question, has your company adopted the current version of the code, so the existing version, the one that has been around for the past 10 years? And then the second question, do you plan to adopt the revised version of the code, the one that we're talking about today, that will go into effect on January 1, 2020? And Ravish, let me turn it over to you to run the polls here. Do we have any responses yet? I can't see the actual poll results on my end. Okay, well, unfortunately, I can't see the results, so I apologize if you have responded to those two questions. I'll let the core data team jump in if there's some insight to share from those. But Ravish, if you wouldn't mind turning the slide, I'll just continue with the presentation here. Slide 10. Just to call out a couple of, I'm not going to go through these slides in entire detail here, but I do just want to call out a couple of key points for some of the revisions. So in section 2, under consulting arrangements with HCPs, we've added a couple of call-out boxes, including some clarifications. So the first call-out box adds just a little bit more definition around what does it mean to have a legitimate need to hire an HCP to provide consulting services. We've included a call-out box calling attention to the idea that HCPs might have a conflict of interest that arises from their industry interactions, and that those conflicts might need to be mitigated either by the physician or the company or by another third party. Guidance on developing an objective and consistent fair market value methodology. That was a question that came up in some of my stakeholder outreach conversations at the front end of this process. And then an explanation of limits on sales involvement and consulting selection. So as part of the effort to identify new areas and new topics for the AdvaMed code, as we went to revise it, I did several meetings with sales forces at different companies of different sizes and different levels within those sales organizations. And time and again, one of the responses, I would ask the question, what questions do you have about the AdvaMed code? What changes would you want to see? What's presented you with the most challenge? And in every meeting, it was raised that the folks didn't understand why sales couldn't be involved in grant decisions or consulting decisions. So we just simply answered the question, and we talked in the revised code about the impact of sales on consulting and the need to divorce those two functions within a company. And we hope that will help just to give the sales organizations that knowledge. Section 3 on company conducted programs and meetings. Here we consolidated existing sections in the code on training and education and sales promotion and other business meetings. The confines and guardrails around establishing those had a lot of similarities, and the process for setting those meetings up is oftentimes very similar, so we combined those into one section for an easier reference. Next slide, please, Ravish, slide 11. So this is Section 4, Educational and Research Grants, Charitable Donations, and Commercial Sponsorships. This is probably the portion of the code that saw the most, the existing version that saw the most change. And here, what we really did was consolidate some existing sections on supporting third-party programs, current Section 4 with current Section 9. And we tried to distinguish between each of those types of support. So we made some clear distinctions between educational grant funding versus commercial sponsorship. We don't talk about commercial sponsorship in the existing version, so this is a change to be aware of. The existing guidance for charitable donations and independent research does remain largely the same. And so for these, excuse me, so for this guidance, you won't see a lot of revision, but we did think that the process associated with funding these types of programs is similar enough that we should call them out. We've included a grant review process checklist. We've included some new information about sending speakers to third-party programs, and we've included a new FAQ that essentially says you can't give HCPs a benefit that the company has received in exchange for its financial support of a third-party program. So, for example, if you're a quote silver sponsor of a continuing medical education program, and the sponsor or organizer offers you a free golf foursome for the afternoon, that's fine for you to take it, but under the AdvaMed code, it would not be permissible for you to then invite one of the HCPs to come and join you on that golf foursome. And then we've also included some FAQs on satellite symposia as well. Next polling question, slide 12, and my apologies again, I can't see the responses, but what is your company's top compliance concern with respect to third-party educational grants? We've seen a lot of issues recently with grant requests being combined with commercial sponsorship requests, and that creating some issues and concerns for companies who try to distinguish the review processes there. Conference organizers that host entertainment or recreational events. We've certainly heard our fair share of stories of conference organizers who include a significant amount of entertainment or recreation in the agenda for the program. Removing sales from educational grant decision making. This is an area that oftentimes comes up where sales might want to have a more active role in those decision-making processes, but company policies might not permit it. And then establishing appropriate rules for hosting satellite symposia at educational conferences. This is another area where we've seen some compliance concerns in the past few years, rather. And of course, I'm sure if you all have seen other challenges as well. I'll just give you a minute to respond to those questions. Okay, moving forward, next slide, slide 13. A new section of the code, section 5 on jointly conducted education and marketing programs, commonly called co-marketing programs. This was a section that is really based on a recent anti-kickback statute settlement related to co-marketing, the CIA for which, the Corporate Integrity Agreement for which includes key guardrails for how to set up co-marketing programs and what would be appropriate guidelines. So we took those, we added some additional controls, some additional details, additional requirements, and put those into the code. We feel that as an industry, this is a long-standing practice, one that can be done appropriately, but it does need some special structure to it. And so we chose to use this iteration of the code to include those requirements: written agreement, bona fide legitimate need, equitable contributions, but from both parties to the activity and payment of the costs, and a requirement to follow the company's off-label and HE&R, health economics and reimbursement policies. Next slide, 14. We've consolidated our language on travel to new section 6. That includes a chart that lists when it's okay and when it's not okay to provide travel. That was one question that came up time and again under the existing version of the code. So we wanted to just create this new section as a one-stop shop for compliance officers seeking to provide good guidance on that topic. Next slide, slide 15. The meals section remains largely the same, but we did add some language encouraging companies to develop policies on HCP meals, including a per-person spending cap. We did this as a result of the 2018 AdvaMed settlement. You all most likely saw the AdvaMed settlement from last, I believe, May 2018 on meals, HCP meals, the provision of meals that were perhaps in a lavish setting, costly meals that were outside the scope of the company's policy and the like. And instead of mandating a specific industry-wide per-person spending cap, we didn't think that was AdvaMed's role. Rather, we felt that the code's role in this work and in this effort was to help companies get to where they need to be for their own business. As many of you know, some companies have a higher risk tolerance than others. Some companies have more well-funded coffers than others, and so while company A may only want their employees to spend $80 per person per meal, company B might allow their employees to spend $140 per person per meal. But we didn't want company A that would want to choose a lower rate to be forced into selecting a higher rate due to the code language. So we kept that higher level. The language remains the same on prohibiting prohibiting entertainment and recreation, prohibiting gifts. We kept the life event gift ban and no giving gifts for weddings, no acknowledgments, gift acknowledgments when there's been a death or a birth from the company. We didn't want to send the message that we were loosening that restriction. Next slide. Two more polling questions for you. And again, I can't see your answers, but please answer. Does your company have a policy on providing meals to HCPs, yes or no? And then which of the following attributes are included in your meal policy? A per-person spending limit, restrictions on alcohol consumption, a ban on spouses or other guests attending, a prohibition on employees splitting checks so that you can better monitor and track to your spending limit, a limit on the types of dining establishments where a meal can take place, a ban on entertainment and recreation, or even all of the above. Please just take a minute to answer those questions. Okay, slide 17. Provision of health economics and reimbursement information. This section has really remained largely the same. The demo and eval section, the real change here, section 12, is the addition of new guidance on consignment. It's actually existing guidance on consignment that the AdvaMed board issued several years ago. And as a result of this process, we decided to incorporate that guidance into the code itself. It's fairly high level, not entirely prescriptive, but rather it recommends for controls around consignment, taking periodic inventory, reconciling discrepancies, returning controls around the return or removal of expired product, for example, and noting that consignment arrangements should be subject to an agreement as part of that arrangement. Slide 18, one of our new sections of the code, communicating for the safe and effective use of medical technology. In other words, off-label communication. This section of the code is really intended to provide a very broad foundation for off-label policies. This is not intended to be the end-all be-all on off-label. It's not intended to give companies all the direction on all the specific nuances surrounding that very complex topic. Rather, it's the industry's way of saying there are situations in which communicating off-label is appropriate. Here are some of those situations. And when a company does communicate off-label, at the bare minimum, they need to make sure that whoever's doing the communication has the right experience and authority, that the communications are truthful and not misleading, and that the information that's off-label is identified as such. Next slide, slide 19, our final news section, section 13, company reps providing technical support in a clinical setting. This is a long-standing practice in the industry, and it varies by sector. So there are some sectors of the industry where having a rep in the clinical setting doesn't make sense. Excuse me. There are other sectors where a rep is really necessary to help with the technical controls associated with using the product during the procedure, to provide that really technical guidance to a physician who is working on a surgical procedure, to help with understanding what's the whole suite of tools and supplies that need to be in the room in order to use the technology. And here we've, again, it's a broad foundation for compliance, not intended to be the end-all be-all or to provide every answer to every nuanced question in, again, this very complex area. But we wanted to give that very basic foundation. You have to be present and under the supervision of the HCP. You can't be making medical decisions. You've got to comply with patient privacy requirements and hospital policies at a bare minimum. And the service shouldn't be provided to eliminate an HCP's overhead expense. Rather, it should only be offered because there's a true need for that technical support. Next slide, slide 20. I wanted to point out a couple of code resources that might be of benefit to you as you take a look at the revised code. These are on the AdvaMed code on the AdvaMed website. I put the address there. There's a crosswalk that shows the current AdvaMed code versus the revised code. It's a fairly lengthy document, about 28 pages. It's a comparison chart. But as you're kind of going through your policies to update them, you can kind of tick and tie with that crosswalk. So hopefully that will help you. And then there's also an overview summary of changes. It's a one-pager front and back that kind of describes the process that the industry went through and what those key changes are. This is a document that's really intended for you to use to help educate your business partners and your colleagues when they might have questions. A couple of questions have come up for me recently about the process, wondering, what was the rigor involved with the process. And this document will tell you that. We had a working group of 55 lawyers and compliance officers. We had approval from the board of directors, which was the CEOs of the multinational corporations. We worked with a lot of stakeholders to get feedback. So this might be a helpful tool for you as you work to advance the code within your own organization. In these slides, so slides 21 and 22, I've included some comparisons, some of the core questions that have come up from me over the past, say, 6 months or so about how the AdvaMed code is distinguishable from the AdvaMed China code, the APAC Med code, and the MedTech Europe code. And these are the real topical areas where you see this. I've indicated whether the code addresses the particular area and maybe a little bit about what the code says. So take a look at this. It's not worth going through for purposes of this webinar. I still want to talk about some sunshine issues and take your questions. But this is one of those areas where if you want to understand how the world is kind of divided out and how it looks different, this chart kind of helps with that. I would point out a couple of things. First, I do think as far as alignment goes, the direct sponsorship phase out that we saw outside the United States a little over a year ago, and I think you can see now how that's a harmonized principle around the world. Satellite symposia and paying for the travel and lodging costs associated with attendees and speakers, I think that's now harmonized across the globe. And you can see some of those other areas that aren't as well. So we'll continue moving forward with that in our harmonization process. Slide 23, and what's next and why is it important? We're going to talk about the expansion of the Sunshine Act to cover advanced practice registered nurses, nurse practitioners, certified nurse midwives, and physician assistants. And I think here it's really just the need to align and validate your HCP policies with the AdvaMed code to make sure that once all of those disclosures do start coming out, you can stand really confidently behind them. That's sort of the important aspect of the AdvaMed code and companies' related HCP policies is that as these interactions become more and more public, more and more open to scrutiny, you want to feel comfortable about them. And complying with the code, complying with your own internal policies is really helpful for that, obviously. We should expect some new anti-kickback statute regulations, safe harbors, guidance, whatever OIG decides to put out on discounts, rebates, warranties, and value-based arrangements in 2019. And I'm talking about the medical device side. Obviously, OIG is really deeply invested in looking at pharmaceutical rebates and eliminating some of the opportunity for price discounts on the pharmaceutical side. This focus is really only on the medical device and med tech side. I think we're going to see some value-based arrangements guidance later this year, maybe early next year, but to stay on the lookout for that. Additional tools and resources. AdvaMed is in the process of developing FAQs, code tools, checklists, and the like to help you in implementing the code. And then we do continue to be under public and press scrutiny with respect to industry relationships. So again, all the more reason to stay closely aligned with the code. Slide 25, Ravish, we've got two poll questions here. We've got a little over 5 minutes left, and I think we can get through the rest of the presentation, but just really quickly, do you believe your company will be impacted by the expanded Sunshine Act requirements, yes or no? And then which type of practitioners does your company more frequently interact with? Certified nurse practitioners, physician assistants, certified nurse specialists, certified registered nurse anesthetists, or certified nurse midwives? If you want to take a minute or two to answer that, that would be great. And again, I can't see your responses. Okay, well, moving on, slide 26 on the Sunshine Act. So the Support Act from October of last year was signed into law in October, and this expanded the definition of covered recipient under the Sunshine Act. We knew this was coming. This is something that had been in the works for a while. It had been proposed several times. I want to say the first time it was proposed was maybe 2015. Excuse me. And so, you know, as it works in Washington, it kind of made its way through finally, and the new provisions were passed. They'll become applicable technically on or after January 1, 2022, but the requirement will be that tracking begins January 1 of 2021 for those advanced practice registered nurses and others. So just be aware of that. We did do a lot of government affairs work on the Hill at AdvaMed to try to either kind of contain the blow to the system from this expansion, or to at least advocate for some further revisions to the existing system that where we see gaps or holes. For example, not enough payment categories are listed or described, so we could use some more nature payment categories. There's a loophole for pods that could be cleared up, and some other issues as well. But unfortunately, they chose to move forward with just the simple expansion. Next slide, slide 27. We do expect probably over the next couple of weeks, we're going to see proposed regulations. Typically, the Sunshine Act regulations come out with a proposed physician fee schedule. That's usually in July when that comes out. Of course, they could do it later this year, but that's typically how they align the open payments regulations. I'm gonna skip the state disclosure requirements and just talk a little bit about patient assistance programs and the STAR Act. So slide 32, Ravish, the spotlight on patient assistance programs. As you know, there's been a great interest, especially on the pharmaceutical side, for companies' involvement with patient support groups, patient advocacy groups, providers of continuing medical education, copay assistance groups, that kind of thing, professional societies and foundations. And there had been a movement in 2018 to expand Sunshine to include these organizations as covered recipients, whether that's a consumer advocacy organization or a patient advocacy organization, patient education organization. The idea being that lawmakers and policymakers felt that it would be appropriate for the public to know what industry's involvement and potential influence could be on those groups, which may in turn either A, set clinical standards or impact medical judgment, or B, could be the source of grant funding or donations to third parties, but that funding might be sponsored by industry. And so lawmakers really just wanted to make sure they understood those relationships. I would say fortunately that did not pass. I think that would create a lot of issues for both the drug and device industry. I don't think that CMS would get good data out of it. It would probably be a very difficult regulation to put shape and clarity around. What exactly do you mean by a patient advocacy organization? That would be very difficult to define. So it did disappear from Congress's legislative agenda, but that doesn't mean it won't reappear at some point. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And then finally, slide 33, the STAR Act. You probably saw this in April. This was a proposed revision to the Sunshine Act that would have required manufacturers, including device manufacturers, to report the aggregate monetary value and quantity of samples provided to covered recipients. And this would begin data collection in 2023. Now, notably, it has not moved since it was voted out of the House Committee on Ways and Means, but that 40-0 vote, a unanimous support in the original House, the Committee of Original Jurisdiction for this bill, that really says a lot about the bipartisan nature here. And so I think, again, this is something you should probably expect to see coming down the road at some point, but just be aware of it. We have a minute or two left. I'm not sure if there are questions. If there are, Ravish, if you wouldn't mind just reading those to me, I'm happy to answer any questions that are out there. Of course, I'm happy to take questions offline as well. I'm here at Aiken Gump, and you can find me on our website. And I do apologize for the initial 20 minutes that you didn't get with me, but hopefully I've been able to make up for it. So, Ravish, I don't know if there are any questions. I'm happy to take any. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I didn't hear any questions. If you do have questions, like I said, feel free to reach out to me or reach out to Mohammed. We're always happy to help, both of us. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Please take a look at the slides and reach out if you need anything. Core Data team, thank you so much for organizing this today. And again, my apologies for the technical issues at the front end. I wish everybody a great day, and thanks so much for the time. Take care. Bye-bye.